apartment building. But even as he headed out the door, he knew on some level that this was crazy. 3 of County Cork's deadliest gunmen, Pa Murray, Danny Healy, and Martin Donovan, were out there somewhere in the New York night, just itching to take a shot. There'd be hell to pay for what he'd done, and the devil's own bill collectors wanted their due. O'Connor headed up 83rd towards Central Park, where the sheer black rock of Bolivar Hill loomed like a dungeon wall. When he reached Central Park West, he turned north on the west side of the street. The temperature was in the low 60s, so there were plenty of other pedestrians out taking the night air. O'Connor smoked nervously, his eyes on their faces. When he reached 84th Street, he glanced to the left, and sweet Jesus, there was Pa Murray himself with another guy, headed straight for him. O'Connor dashed across the street to the wall that lined Central Park, glancing back at Murray and puffing furiously on a cigarette. He headed north, then suddenly reversed himself, and that's when Danny Healy came out from behind a tree right smack in front of him. In a gray coat and a gray fedora, Healy looked like some kind of natty avenging angel. It all happened so fast. Healy, pointing a revolver at his chest, saying something like, "I've got you now," then pulling the trigger. Danny Healy and Martin Donovan had been near the corner of 83rd and Columbus staking out the flat when O'Connor walked out the door and headed toward the park. Pa Murray and Mullins, a guy from Derry who had signed on for the hunt, were a little further up Columbus near 84th Street. Healy asked Donovan to tell Murray and Mullins to head up 84th toward the park, where they might be able to head off O'Connor while Healy came up from behind him. Once he caught sight of Murray, O'Connor had been too preoccupied to notice Healy until he stepped out from behind the tree. The gunman thought his first bullet caught O'Connor in the chest, but the guy dashed across Central Park West into the 84th Street intersection. Healy chased him, blazing away, hitting O'Connor twice. To Healy's astonishment, O'Connor kept going, ducking around the trolley. Healy followed, firing a shot that thudded into a building. 4 bullets gone, only 2 left, and his prey was still scrambling. O'Connor kept changing direction, like a panicked hare flushed by a pack of hounds. He tried to go north on the west side of Central Park West, but almost ran into Donovan, who pointed a revolver and squeezed the trigger. Nothing. A misfire. But the bullets were finally having an effect on O'Connor's adrenaline-infused body. Wounded, winded, and bleeding, he slumped to the sidewalk. I caught up with him and fired twice more at him, hitting him, Healy recalled. As Healy fired away, the getaway car came roaring up to the intersection, the kid from the Bronx at the wheel. Healy knew he was supposed to get in, but he just stood there frozen, surrounded by a large group of pedestrians. He couldn't imagine he was going to get away with this. This wasn't home in Cork, where people knew to look away when Murray and the boys cut someone down in the streets. This was the very heart of Manhattan, and a horde of people were staring straight at him. One thought kept going through his mind: no chance of escape. Then Donovan's commanding voice rang out. "Run for it, Danny, run." Christ, but Healy took him literally. Donovan saw Healy snap out of it, but instead of getting in the car, Healy walked casually for a bit, then broke into a run, west on 84th. And Donovan saw the crowd of stunned pedestrians form into a posse that quickly gave chase. Dozens of them. They figured it was an underworld hit, and they weren't about to let a bunch of gangsters get away with murder in the middle of Manhattan. Donovan climbed into the car. It looked natural enough. He was wearing a chauffeur's coat he'd gotten from the Bronx kid's family. And then they were all giving chase, the car and the crowd, until the car got ahead of the posse. They kept pace with Healy for a bit while they tried to talk him into getting in so they could all get the hell out of there. The trouble they went through to get that getaway car. Over 1,000 cars in the St. Patrick's Day parade, and they couldn't use one of them, Donovan complained. Finally, Johnny Culhane from the Bronx came through. He had an auto rental and taxi business, but he wanted no part of driving a getaway car for a killing. Culhane was already facing a boatload of legal trouble involving several hundred Ireland-bound Tommy guns the feds had confiscated from a rust bucket docked in Hoboken. As Culhane begged off, his 17-year-old son, James, jumped in, exasperated. "I'll drive the damn car," he said, which is how they ended up with a kid from the Bronx as wheelman. And now, after all that, Healy wouldn't get in the car, even with half of Manhattan on his tail. Clearly, someone would have to put a stop to this posse business, Donovan realized. At 34, he was the grown-up in the group, older than the others by a decade. He'd have to do it or it wouldn't get done. It would have helped if he'd still had the revolver, but Donovan had tossed it after it misfired. No point in keeping a useless, incriminating weapon at a crime scene. So now he'd have to pull off a bluff. One man against close to 50. But Donovan had gotten Danny Healy into this mess by recruiting him for the O'Connor job. Healy hadn't hesitated then. Donovan didn't now. He got out of the car and confronted the crowd, just 15 feet away. If even one of them dared to make a quick lunge, he'd have been hopelessly overpowered in seconds. So Donovan slid a hand into his coat pocket, as if to pull a gun. "What do you want, trouble?" he asked the man at the front of the crowd. "No." "Well, where are you going?" "I'm going right back where I came from," the man said. He turned on his heels and did just that, followed by most of the crowd. Then another quick conversation with Danny about getting in the car, but it didn't do any good. The normally reliable Healy was rattled, out of his element, not thinking straight. Donovan had shouted, "Run," so run he would. Healy and O'Connor, the shooter and the shot, had one thing in common that fine spring evening. They were bound and determined to stretch their legs, even if it killed them. So, coming out in the spring, ambush at Central Park, true story, South Spring footnoted, Fordham University Press. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Mark Bullock, everyone. Please keep your eye out for that book in the spring, Ambush at Central Park. All right, up next we have a recent graduate from Princeton University who is working on a book called about improbable coincidences, like getting struck by lightning twice. And she was gracious enough to agree to share some of that with us today, and it's her first time reading with us, so please give a warm welcome to Lauren Howard.
So I'm going to be sharing the first chapter of the book that I'm working on, which is inspired by the true story of Roy Sullivan, who was a man who was struck by lightning 7 times in his life. But the story, more so than him, focuses on a futuristic city that is plagued with horrible luck. And in general, it's just an exploration of strange coincidences, good and bad luck, all sorts of deterministic experiences. Unluckiness strikes with perfect randomness, as is well and proper, and by definition, in all of Earth's places but one. The city of Acerbica, unimpressed by likelihoods, instead looms 5 standard deviations above the international average for daily municipal misfortune. On the global stage, if places were people, it would play the part of a Roy Sullivan. Roy Sullivan is a man you must know if you are to know Acerbica, the Miseropolis, a city most unfair. A Shenandoah park ranger who lived and died in the 20th century, he was written to the record books as the owner of the rarest personal collection in known history. 7 lightning strikes, accumulated neatly over the course of 35 years. Together, those 7 strikes made him a staggering mathematical anomaly and the tacit symbol of a city plagued with unluck generations after he died. The human lightning rod, they called him, or, more respectfully, the unluckiest man in the world. In an emergency public health report addressing a spike in deaths due to falling baby grand pianos, despite their ban years prior, the Acerbica Surgeon-Specific famously referenced Sullivan's most reverent epithet. "Our home is the unluckiest world for a man," she said, "and similarly unlucky for those who are not a man. But it is our home nonetheless." The generous odds that a person living to 70 will be struck by lightning a single time in their life are 1 to the 10 to the power of 4, or 1 in 10,000. 99.99% of humans will never be struck by lightning, but will occasionally hear about such events in the news. This seems comfortably reasonable, but things get far more interesting once lightning strikes twice. For each consecutive strike on the same individual, the improbability compounds such that every additional strike is 4 orders of magnitude less likely than the one preceding. This creates an echelon of unlikelihood that Asurbicans like to call Sullivan's strata, a statistical manifesto commonly used to predict the odds that something might or might not happen. Finding a $100 bill on the ground might be classified as a strike 1. Getting poisoned because you were unknowingly making love to a foreign spy and the cyanide capsule stored in their fake tooth came loose and fell into your mouth is perhaps a strike 6. 7th strikes are considered divine artifacts of fortune, and flippant use of the term is widely considered taboo. The human brain is notoriously bad at comprehending the sort of exponential growth that defines the extent of Roy Sullivan's bad luck, or even the general misfortunes of the average Asurbican. But most will find that Sullivan's strata, which now follows in full, always provides a bit of relief. The odds of being struck by lightning once in an average lifespan are 1 in 10,000. The percentage of people on this planet who will be hit by lightning in their lifetime is a mere 0.01%. The same proportion of oysters and people in a year contain a pearl and kill themselves, respectively. On a stormy April day in 1942, Roy Sullivan was taking shelter in a fire watchtower in Shenandoah. The watchtower was struck multiple times and caught fire. Sullivan dashed outside and was immediately struck by lightning, which seared down his right leg and left a hole in his shoe. Thus was strike 1. The odds of being struck by lightning twice in life are 1 in 100 million. On the same order of magnitude exists the probability of winning the Mega Millions jackpot on a single ticket. 1 in 300,575,350. In the July of 1969, Roy Sullivan was driving his truck through the Blue Ridge Mountains. The cars are typically one of the safest places to be in a thunderstorm due to their metal frames, effectively acting as Faraday cages. Lightning happened to enter the truck through the open window after bouncing off a nearby tree trunk. This strike set Sullivan's hair on fire, incinerated his eyelashes and brows, and relieved him of consciousness. Thus was strike 2. The chances of a third lightning strike are 1 in a trillion. In the known universe, there are an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. If people were existing galaxies, 0.00000000001% of them would be struck by lightning thrice. This probability operates on a scale 1 magnitude above the probability of playing 2 consecutive 5-card royal flushes from perfectly shuffled 52-card decks. 1 in 422,162,067,600. And just 1 magnitude under the Drake equation, which pessimistically estimates the chance of another intelligent civilization existing in our galaxy at 1 in 10 trillion. Almost exactly a year after his second strike, in the July of 1970, Roy Sullivan was hit while standing in the front garden of his home. The bolt went straight into his shoulder. Thus was strike 3. The odds of a 4th strike are 1 in 10 quadrillion, similar to the odds of winning the Powerball lottery twice in a row, with odds at 1 in 85 quadrillion, 381 trillion, 557 billion. There are an estimated 7.5 quintillion grains of sand on Earth. Thus, if grains of sand were people, 1/50th of a teaspoon of all sand on the planet would include those who have been struck by lightning 4 times. With equally poor luck, the odds that you specifically would be conceived out of all possible gamete combinations in a virile sexual encounter are about 1 in 40 quadrillion. But although every person here has already won the poor law of conception, there is only one Roy Sullivan. In the wet spring of 1972, Roy Sullivan was struck while manning a campground ranger station. His hair caught fire, but his head could not fit under the restroom sink, and he instead resorted to damp paper towels to help stamp out the flames. At this point, Sullivan was noted by friends and family to have changed his previous inclinations against the superstitious and began to believe that a higher power was attempting to kill him. He started carrying a can of water with him at all times, in expectation of future headfires. Thus was strike 4. The fifth strike is at the odds of 1 in 100 quintillion, a magnitude greater than the number of miles between the Andromeda Galaxy and our Milky Way. A fifth strike is just slightly less likely than drawing to a full house 7 poker hands in a row, which occurs only once in every 76 quintillion games. In the summer of 1973, Roy Sullivan attempted to outdrive a storm that had formed, which he swore was following him. When he finally thought he was safe to get out of his truck, he was struck. His left shoe was knocked off, the can of water was employed. Thus was strike 5. A sixth strike in 1 in 1 septillion is a magnitude more improbable than playing a royal flush 4 hands in a row. 1 in 178 sextillion, 220 quintillion, 810 quadrillion, and just a shy more likely than winning the Mega Millions jackpot 3 times in a row. 1 in 27 septillion. June 1976, a bolt from another following cloud hit Roy Sullivan. His hair caught fire, the can of water was employed. Thus was strike 6. The probability of a 7th strike comes to 1 in 10 octillion, on par to a perfectly 50-50 coin landing on tails for an unbroken 93 flip streak. The average 70-kilogram human body is made up of 7 octillion atoms. Not even one atom out of them all would be a Roy Sullivan. To further acknowledge the divinity of a 7th strike, note that the observable universe is only 2 octillion, 887 septillion, 127 sextillion, 39 quintillion, 19 quadrillion, 210 trillion, 541 billion, 644 million, 707,982 feet in diameter. June 1977, Roy Sullivan was struck with lightning while fishing. Chest and stomach scorched, hair on fire. After leaping into the water to douse himself, a bear attacked him in an attempt to get a trout that had just caught on his line. Sullivan struck the beast in the head with a stick and fried the trout for dinner. Thus and finally was strike 7. Hearing these numbers should lead you to only one conclusion. This man was inconceivably unlucky. But then, you might realize that lightning did not just strike Roy Sullivan 7 times, but lightning failed to kill him 7 times. And then, realizing this, you should wonder if he was instead exceptionally lucky. Any of those strikes could have killed poor Roy Sullivan, but none of them managed to finish the job. In fact, Roy Sullivan would go on to outlive the forensic pathologist who moved to his little town of Dunes, Virginia, specifically in the hopes of being the one to dissect him when the thunderclouds finally struck him dead. After waiting hungry decades to put Roy Sullivan's strange and magnetic body under the knife, the pathologist would die of a gangrenous intestine, and a more privileged coroner would tend to Roy Sullivan 3 months later, when Roy Sullivan, age 71, would shoot himself in the head over unrequited love. And so was the life of Roy Sullivan, a man either most beloved or most beloathed by some god above, a man whose fortune continues to go unrivaled in its absurdity, though the downtrodden citizens of Acerbica try as they might. Perhaps this god that hounded Roy Sullivan with so many thunderbolts saw that future in which a mere mortal would become an icon of the despondent. Perhaps this god's vow to prevent such idolatry would inadvertently spur that very man's worship. But perhaps the man was just a man, and a suffering city would simply find heart and self in the long-dead Roy Sullivan, whose luck had somehow been worse than its own.
Lauren Howard, everyone. So our next presenter is a friend of Lauren's, also a fellow graduate from Princeton University, and her name is Kylie Logan, same as the characters in my book, so I don't know what the odds of that are, but Kylie has a play coming up next week in New York City, right? And she's going to share a little bit of it with us, so please give a warm welcome to Kylie Logan.
Hi everyone, I'm Kylie. Nice to meet you. It's true, I do have a play coming up. It is a solo show that I wrote a year ago when I was in